All right, welcome everybody to Book Think number 10. So I think this is the first of the double digits. And for my guest today, I have Liam from Liam's Lyceum, an excellent channel that I like to check out with tons of book reviews. And so, Liam, if you could tell everybody a little bit about your channel and stuff and about yourself, maybe.
Yeah, so I do lots of reviews. I tend to keep them short. I don't show my face in them. I don't feel like that really adds to the experience. Also, it's just easier for me to record that way. Um, but I'm also really far behind on reviews. I'm like 5 months at this point behind. So if a review comes out, I normally read the book 5 months ago. Um, just I read because I only do 2 reviews in a week normally, sometimes
Yeah.
three, but I read generally more than that in a week, so I just get further and further behind. But I also do I do a weekly update on Saturdays, and on Wednesdays I'll just do whatever. And so I mean, yeah, it's just a lot of different things. Some of it will be whatever I'm interested in. You're right,
Yeah.
like medieval stuff or philological, though admittedly those are not there's not a lot of those. I feel like I need to prepare more for those, so they don't come out very often. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, you're a student of philology, right?
yeah, yeah.
And so that's always pretty interesting when you bring that stuff up on your channel. I like hearing about that stuff because I'm a student of history myself, so it kind of goes hand in hand a little bit when you have language and history and
Right,
pretty
yeah.
cool stuff. Yeah, yeah, and that's pretty amazing that you actually read enough books to be behind 5 months on reviews. So,
I will.
and
I look at it that if I ever slow down on my reading, that then I'll still have videos to record, and put out, and so it gives me a chance to catch back up as well. So
sure, yeah, 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 and you're a gamer too, just like I
mhm.
am.
Yeah.
You play D&D and other role playing versions, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I normally play D&D on the day we're recording this Sunday, actually, but uh, just I think a couple of my brothers are out of town. That's normally who I play with my brothers. So
Right. Yeah. And you also have taken on this extraordinary project to read every Forgotten Realms novel. Uh,
yes,
I find that fascinating.
yes, extraordinary and fascinating is probably a good way to put it. Maybe insane. I mean, I say that, but there's definitely people out there who've read all of them, right? I
Yeah,
mean, like
sure. Exactly.
I'm pretty sure Ed Greenwood has, but he's also the creator of the Forgotten Realms, so he's just kind of
Makes
involved
sense.
that way. But I know, and there's plenty of readers who have read more than I have. I did come up with the idea a few years ago at this point, and my idea was also that I would blog the experience.
Right.
So I have this blog that's been running longer than my channel. It's called the Forgotten Realms Lyceum, um, and I'm really behind on that actually, but still, every once in a while I'll put out a blog post about all my thoughts on Forgotten Realms books, pretty much. So, and I do review most of them actually that I've read since starting my channel on my channel as well. There's a couple where I didn't make. I review almost every book I read. There's a couple of the Forgotten Realms ones I didn't review for whatever reason, but yeah.
Yeah, I always find that fascinating when you catch up on a Forgotten Realms book, and it's something that I read when it came out, 30 years ago, whatever it was, and that it brings back a lot of memories
Mhm.
that I have of those books, when I read those back then. So I really enjoyed the content. So I'll put a link to that your channel below so everybody can go there. And today, though, we are talking about Witchy Eye by DJ Butler, or otherwise known as David John Butler. Uh, and he's um, he's been around for a little while now. He used to be a lawyer, and then he published some books, including this Witchy Eye, which was came out in 2017 and was nominated for a couple of awards, Dragon Award and a Gemmell Award. and then he went on to publish the it's part of a trilogy, so he went on to publish the rest of the trilogy. And I think one of the other books was did win the actual Dragon Award for best alternate history novel. And it's considered epic flintlock fantasy. And I'm not familiar with flintlock fantasy, so I don't know if maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, uh, I don't really describe myself as a big reader of Flintlock fantasy, but that is a correct, designator. So it basically just means fantasy that is, instead of being more medieval or Renaissance based, it's more, I guess, early modern to, like colonial based, some, and setting, right? Whether it's, in this case, it's actually our world, though a heavily modified version of our world.
Okay,
So like, I think the most popular Flintlock fantasy series would be uh, the Powder Mage trilogy.
I've heard of that. Yeah,
I don't even remember who wrote it right now. I
yeah,
did
me
read
either.
it, but it's been some years. The first book is Promise of Blood, I think, in that series, and then I think Adrian Tchaikovsky, I believe, wrote a book in that's Flintlock fantasy called like Guns of the Dawn or something. I haven't read that
Right,
one.
right. Yep.
So basically, there's just guns, and it's not like our modern guns. It's black powder guns normally or something like that. So
Oh, okay. And so the book we're talking about here, Witchy Eye, I got the cover for it here. This is the cover, I think, for the audio version, which I thought was a pretty cool cover compared to the other one. I don't know if you have the other book or if you read
yeah,
it.
I have
Oh, there you
the
go. Yeah,
the
that's the
mass market here.
mass market paperback. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So I really like this cover, so I figured I'd show that picture. And So the question I have first of all is like, how did you find out about this book and this series? How did you come across it?
That's a good question, actually. This is one that I actually have a story for. Most of them just like I found out about it somewhere online or something like that, or I
Yeah.
saw it in the bookstore. In this case, it's kind of ironic, and we'll probably get into why it's a little ironic later. But
Hmm.
it's I followed Brandon Sanderson on Goodreads. I'm not sure he's still really active on Goodreads, but this was like 2018 or so. Um, and he posted a review for a book by Christopher Husberg, which was the second book, I believe, in his series. I think it's Dark Immolation by Christopher Husberg, which the title makes it sound really dark. There's definitely darker things out there, but anyways, those are good books. And I was like, okay, let me try out this like first book by Christopher Husberg, right? And I read that, but at the same time, I was like, I'm gonna follow this Husberg guy because I don't know who he is really, I guess, but he was one of those students of Brandon Sanderson, right? That took Sanderson's writing class and did publishing stuff, and so Sanderson often will blurb those books or whatever, right? And he was on a book tour for that second book when I started following him on Twitter, I believe. Um, I don't think he's active on Twitter anymore, but he was on a book tour with one other author the whole tour. And this was like on the West Coast of the United States. They were like in California and Nevada, I think, for the most part. One other author as well for part of that book tour. That other author was Christopher Rocchio, actually.
Oh,
But the one that Christopher Husberg was with the whole time was DJ Butler. And his tour was for Witchy Winter, which is the sequel to Witchy Eye.
okay.
And I was like, okay, I'll try that out too. And so I got a copy of Witchy Eye and read it and really enjoyed it. So, and it's interesting. It's the series I've seen it online called Witchy Eye, like the Witchy Eye series. But I've also seen it called the Witchy War series. I think that's the term Butler prefers.
Okay.
It's
All right.
also it's also only a soft trilogy. So there's Witchy Eye, Witchy Winter, and Witchy Kingdom, I believe.
Yep.
It's actually I read this, 2018. So, and there's a second trilogy that's also kind of like a soft trilogy, and that starts with Serpent Daughter, and the last two books are not out yet. Uh,
Right. Yep.
and they're like Serpent Son and Serpent Mother or something. I don't know. I've talked to Butler. I'm kind of friends with Dave now, actually.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So, but I was not when I read this book. So, yeah.
Cool. And so you mentioned a little bit about it, but like, um, what's the premise of this story? What's like the history around this story? Because you said it is pseudo alternate history, flintlock era, colonial era.
Yeah.
But what else? What is it about this story that we would have some history around it, just a premise of it, and what do you think would
Uh,
draw
it,
us in?
it's kind of hard to describe, and it's set around if okay, also it's been a couple years, so I think it's set around 1815, 1820.
Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
somewhere around there. And the United States does not exist as we know it. Right.
Ah.
History has gone a different course in some ways, but it's also very much more fantasy-esque. For example, there's Oliver Cromwell was a necromancer. Right. Benjamin Franklin is a sorcerer, I think, is what he's called, the lightning magician or something like that. Um, and so there's things like that. At the time the story takes place, France is part of a caliphate, for example. I mean, so like very different. Um, and you have some historical figures, right? Like Oliver Cromwell, obviously Benjamin Franklin. You have Andrew Jackson is mentioned, except for he's just hanging dead and desiccated in a cage in New Orleans. Um, and so, I mean, you got some weird stuff going on. And so instead of the United States, you have this like this electorate empire, kind of like the Holy Roman Empire, in the United States, and mostly just east of the Mississippi, because west of the Mississippi is mostly rampaging beastmen. Um, and so it doesn't get rid of the things. It doesn't get rid of like Native Americans at all. In fact, there's Ojibwe in this book. There's Ojibwe, like people who speak Ojibwe, and it's written out in this book. Um,
Oh, okay. All
but
right.
also
Cool.
things like German and French, and like it's really epic. So it's really about the story about this girl on the front, or the front of the other cover you got here. Her name's Sarah
Yeah.
Calhoun, and she is the adopted daughter of one of these electorates down in Nashville, if I'm remembering correctly. And she has this eye that's swollen shut um, at the
Hmm.
start, and she kind of casts hexes though and stuff like that. She's a witch practically, right? And it has something to do with her eye, and you basically come to find out in a kind of a typical normal epic fantasy fashion that she is not exactly who she seems to be, right? That she is somehow related to the kings of Cahokia, because Cahokia is still around in this. So yeah.
For are we? What is Cahokia for our? For everybody who's
Oh
listening?
yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So Cahokia, nowadays you just say Cahokia is this archaeological site almost on uh, the banks of the Mississippi in Illinois. It's pretty close to St. Louis, and there's very big mounds there.
Okay.
Was once a very large Native American city, um, since abandoned and not used, but still very big mounds. I think Monk's Mound is one of the biggest mounds, I think, in the Western Hemisphere or something like that. So it's still lived in as a city, but there's a lot of people in these various kingdoms that kind of connect with these electorate that are not. They're called Ophidians, right? They're not related to Eve. They're related to Adam, but they're not related to Eve. Um,
Ah,
so they kind of get persecuted by the empire of sorts. So
okay. All right. Cool. And these historical figures. How many other like historical figures you think figure into the? It seems like Butler's playing with figures and stuff like that, and doing different dances with real history, but only but suiting him for his world.
yeah, he does it in a really interesting way, I think, because it's just kind of bonkers. To be honest, like it's really silly. You can I think he's just kind of having a fun time.
Mhm.
You have like if I'm remembering correctly, that the emperor is Thomas Penn, as in Pennsylvania, right? So
Okay. Yeah.
I think this is a fictional Penn. I don't think this person existed at all, but right, still related to the real Penn family. Um, and that's I don't know. It's pretty interesting stuff. You also have like a Peter Plowshare, uh, in like a Simon Sword like mythological like character, and Peter Plowshare. I think that's what his name is. Again, it's been a minute, but Peter Plowshare to me sounds a lot like Piers Plowman which is a medieval work. Uh, that's like an allegory if you've ever read that. Um,
Hmm.
but it's a very it's very epic, but in like a weird like realistic way, kind of realistic if magic existed and like these fantasy creatures existed. Like the magic is not some system, put it that way, right? It's not scientific like you would see in a lot of more contemporary fantasy these days, are very Sanderson-esque. Um, and it's very much like based off of actual magic, like historical magic books or text, right? Like he went and
Okay.
read books that are like, this is a book of magic. I'm going to use this spell in my book, type of thing, right? And so it's very authentic feeling in that sense, right? It's very religious also because it's kind of inherently so in real life, at least. Um, it's I don't know, yeah, and the way that he treats historical figures is interesting to say the least. So I mean, but uh, but fun. I think it's fun, especially with these how these necromancers come into play. They're called Lazars normally, as in like Lazarus, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
Sure. Yeah. Is that like would you think it would be something like a voodoo or Necronomicon type stuff? Is that involved in this, or is it
um, yes, actually, the voodoo though is more separate, if I remember correctly, from the Lazar stuff. There's various forms of magic, right? So like you'll
okay?
have
Yeah.
one guy who use a very more Native American style, right? Kind of based off that. Like wearing his hat backwards or his jacket inside out, or and he rides on horses in streams and he travels and um, or like there are the people. New Orleans is actually a big part of the first book, and there is a
Okay.
certain
Yeah.
character who uses like Loa and death magic via like an actual funeral to try to kill someone else, which is actually based off real life things. I was reading about one a couple weeks ago actually, where they tried to use this like energy from a funeral to actually try to kill someone else, or right like burying like an effigy type of thing as well. So I mean like,
Oh, right. Yeah.
um, so pretty interesting stuff. But there is actually this Loa like voodoo aspect as well, particularly down in the Louisiana portion of the book. So,
Hmm. Now, does it still have the trappings of it being a colonial presence, or is that gone by this time? Or
yeah, so it's definitely different, right? I mean, because the electorate is a thing and not the United States, and it is a little later than what we would say is typically the colonial period. I mean, colonial for the United States proper. I mean, if you go west, you go south, you go north, it's still colonial, right?
Mhm.
And so they do go to Arcadia, I think, in one of the books. So what we generally call Canada these days. Also, there's like Spanish presence down in the south.
Mhm.
So you get Spanish in the books, and you'll get, like I said, a lot of French. The French is different than the French itself is the language is normal, right? But then you have like Mamluks, French Mamluks, right? Which is like not what you normally think of as French. Right? That's dealing with the caliphate and the Islamic faith of
Right.
these French
Yeah. Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
So like, um, so yeah, you'll get stuff like that. It's really varied. It's actually like a lot, right? Like, or you'll have like magic that's just a like a Bible page, like used, like for stuff like that. It's very interesting. But you also have like hillbillies from Tennessee, right? And they speak like on the page it's written like their dialect, and it's like kind of hard to understand, uh, and they're very like kind of down with the man and not they're like for freedom and stuff like that. So it's very varied in like what's going on here. You do have like New England segments as well. That's typically where Thomas Pynn is though, and he like kind of communes with like odd entities to say the least. So yeah.
Odd entities not being your typical angels and demons, and something
Yeah,
just different.
not quite the same at least.
Okay.
There's some weird stuff going on, especially when you get to like the Cahokia bits, and it's just like mounds and like summoning like yeah, just different things. So, so
All right. Well, it sounds like your main character here might be doing a little traveling then, since you mentioned all these different areas. And so, is it more like a traveling quest thing, or is it circumstances force her to
It's kind of a mix of both.
mix of both? Okay.
So it's yeah, see, in that sense, it feels very epic fantasy, right? Like
Oh, okay,
there's
right.
this call to adventure at the beginning. It doesn't feel like it very much. I mean, it does. Like all the bits are there, right? Call to adventure. There's a mentor figure in the first book, um, who is like a priest magician, kind of, um, and he's very important to like her learning of magic, for example. Right? That's very like that sounds like Aragon almost, right? You know what I mean? Something like, and Aragon is just watered down normal epic fantasy, right? You know that we generalize at least, and so like in that sense, it's pretty typical, right? Like, but it also it kind of gets rid of the highfalutin like trappings of epic fantasy. It's not medieval. It's more dirty and like early 19th century feeling. Um, got weird dialects that you do not associate the dialect of Nashville with epic fantasy. All right, so I mean like and that's what the main character speaks in because she was raised in Nashville. And so, I mean, like,
Oh,
that's
okay.
right. They were going to be wearing coon caps rather than, like, shining armor, right? So,
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Cool. So so what was it about this story that spoke to you that you know that
it's a
really
good question.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it is just the stuff I already said. It feels very authentic. One thing I think is nice. You kind of have this problem in, well, I haven't read a lot of stuff that should include Native American stuff that doesn't. I mean, something would be like The Arithmetist by Brandon Sanderson, which like there's just no Native American presence at all, and that's why he has never written a sequel because he doesn't know how to resolve that. Um, right? But you often see in like something like sci-fi, right? Like there's just no African Americans or Africans at all in the future, right? At least in older sci-fi.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
and so I really like that he has like this Native American presence. Um, and it's very much just with everything else, right? I mean, like you have these poor Irish immigrants, and these German immigrants, and these Dutch immigrants, and these French speakers, and these Spanish speakers, and these English speakers. But you also have Ojibwe, right? And it's like, who learns Ojibwe to write a book? Like, that's cool,
Yeah.
and it also works
Yeah, I
really
know.
well. I
That's
mean, so I mean, like, it's a
that's
very entertaining book. It is a little slow, like your normal epic fantasy is. I don't even read a lot of epic fantasy, right? But like this is okay. I read a decent amount, but like not as much as other
yeah, you do.
people. So, I mean, but like I'm not all for it as other people are. I was like, I could get on here and talk about a sword and sorcery book, and I was like, and then no one would read it because it's sword and sorcery. Anyway, so, but
Well,
but I was like, this is a cool book. It definitely has this trappings of big bad thing looming on the horizon. Getting more and more of this information through Sarah as she's only 15. She does have these hexes, but she's not experienced with it, right? So she's coming in more into this her own power, so to speak. And a lot of the main
yeah.
characters are young, but you do get a lot of these characters. You'll have like old, very not fit men, or something like that, or like women in their 40s that get like attention or stuff like that. So you get a lot of like scopes of life, right? And it's
Okay.
very refreshing, and it's done well, anyways. I mean, so yeah.
Yeah, well that's like leads into my next question, because you say it's done well. So it's like the question is why do you think people should read it? Why should I read it? What's the
Well, one
biggest
thing
convincing point?
I don't know if this is the biggest convincing thing, but it's free digitally, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I don't know about on Amazon, probably not there, but on Bane's website, because Bane is the publisher,
Right.
they're notorious for bad covers, which is funny because this is good art. I just don't know if the cover design is the best. Like
Yeah.
Dan, I think it's Dan Dos Santos, who's a fantastic artist in my opinion. So,
Yeah.
but like,
Well, from a distance, it almost looks like cyberpunky almost from a
yeah,
distance, and
yeah.
I'm sure it's better closer up, but
Yeah, I mean, I talked. Dave has told me a story actually about how there's like a Bane booth or whatever, and he had one time was standing at this Bane booth at a con, and someone came up, got a copy of literally every book on the table besides his, because the covers were too nice. They did not look like Bane books, And I was like, because Bane books, that's their shtick. Their covers kind of suck. Um, and so, and so I mean, like, well, I agree. This is not like the coolest looking one. The other covers look much better, I think. Um, but it's free. Bane does this thing on their website that if a series has enough books out in said series, the first book is free digitally. So
Oh,
you can
okay.
go to Bane's website and read it digitally for free. Just
Oh,
download it. They are
that's
DRM
great.
free. You'll get like 5 different versions, right? Like you want your EPUB or your Mobi or whatever, they'll give you
Yeah.
it all, right?
Huh.
So that it's free. I mean, I think that's a convincing reason people should try it.
That's a great reason. Ah, that's funny. Um, I mean, yeah, and plus it sounds like a cool story. It sounds pretty unique. Like all the things you said, all the things you mentioned about it could have definitely seems like it could appeal to epic fantasy fans who want something a little different than your medieval settings or other um, other settings that don't involve a couple of modern things like guns and or I guess flintlock is the term that's used for it. But so that all sounds pretty cool. It does remind me of I don't know if you're familiar with J. Gregory Keyes.
I
He
don't.
did a series called Age of Unreason,
Mm,
which basically takes place the same period, maybe a little earlier, like the
mhm,
1770s or something like that. That involved Ben Franklin, and it it was um, it was a pretty cool series. I think you would like it because it had all that same kind of thing where it was the magic. There was magic, but he had to kind of use science to unlock it,
mm.
and he still was playing with lightning and stuff like that. So, but it was cool because Ben Franklin was the main character, but he was
Uh-huh.
also, uh, but at the time, the colonialists were also making diplomatic ties with the Native Americans against the British instead of, how it did work out. But it was pretty cool. So this book kind of reminds me of that because I read those a long time ago, and I was like, oh yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And so I think that yeah, I think people could definitely check it out for all these reasons here. And and you said it's free on the Bain website, so that's uh that's outstanding. And have you read the rest of the trilogy too?
Yeah, I've read all the sequels
Yeah.
that are out. Every time I see Dave, I remind him he has to write the next ones as well. So,
Cool. Alrighty. And all right. Anything else? Any last parting words?
um, read it. I think. I mean, I have a tendency to tout books that aren't super popular, but I think in a lot of cases deserve to be more popular. Um, it's this Dave is a big fan, like friend of Christopher Rocchio's, and it's interesting to see like Christopher's success like skyrocket, and Dave is
Yeah.
just kind of not as much. So and I think they're both very worthwhile authors. I know we're not talking
Okay.
about Christopher Rocchio, but very worthwhile. I think both of them. So um, yeah, I just and my opinion is not just because I'm friends with Dave. Like I said, I read this before I ever knew
Right.
Dave. So yeah. So
Awesome. All right, Liam, thank you so much for coming on for this episode of Book Tink. And like I always tell everybody out there, I'll leave your links to your channel down below. And I always say, be good to each other. And thank you.
thanks for having me.